Shalom, family. Shalom. Good to see everybody. Hope you're doing well. Well, guess what? Donald Trump and Pam Bondi tried to erase a report that says white supremacy, extremism, far right extremism commit the most crimes, not only here in America, but worldwide. Okay. Now, isn't it amazing? They love putting out there, which is now officially a lie, that Black people commit the most crimes. Now, look, your attorney general and your president tried to erase a report that said people that look like them are the biggest criminals in America, and their extremist groups commit more crimes than any other group worldwide. I wonder why they wanted that off, because it didn't fit the narrative. It didn't fit the narrative. But the fact that they tried to take it off and people all over the place is trying to grab this report, y'all. It is like everybody is going online trying to get this report to see what Pam Bondi and Donald Trump was trying to hide. Well, you know what? It didn't take much for me to get it. You know what I did, y'all? I found out the name of the report, and I went out on Facebook, and that baby was right there, and I was able to download it from Facebook. So it's still out there. What Pam Bondi and Donald Trump don't understand, the internet is forever. It doesn't matter that you had this report on a government website for the White House, for the DOJ. As long as once it goes on the internet, you know how many times a report like that will get recycled and downloaded and passed along all over the internet? So it doesn't matter if y'all deleted it from your website, it's still on websites everywhere else. You're not going to be able to get rid of it just by taking it off of the government website. Sorry, it's going to take way more than that. It is so many people coming up online on their videos saying, I got the report. I got the report. They wanted this thing gone. Ladies and gentlemen, do not ever let them form their non existent lips to say Black people commit the most crimes. It is a straight up lie. They wanted this report gone because it doesn't fit the narrative that they have been putting out for decades. They tried to make it seem like all we do is sit around committing crimes. No, that's all what they do. That's what they do. All they do is sit around committing crimes. And actually, y'all, if you really think about it, it would make more sense that they would commit more crimes, because the system is designed to favor them. So if a system is designed to favor you, then even when you commit crimes, that same system is going to look out for your best interests, where it won't look out for us at all, because we know the system hates us. So they're not going to look out for us. So if they're looking out for your best interest, that means they're not going to, report all of the crimes you're committing. And according to this report, y'all, they can no longer justify Black men being in jail more than anyone else. Nobody should be in jail more than white men. They should be the biggest ones in prison in America. And the fact that they are not, and a report is saying they are committing the biggest crimes up in here, tells you how systemic and how racist America is. So just to deflect from your problems, you're putting Black men in jail. So it looks like your hands are clean when your hands have never been clean. So they're deflecting onto us what they have been doing up in here all along. And you see what kind of shifty people are running this place? Pam Bondi, a white woman, Donald Trump, a white man, came together to wipe out the real problem in America because it don't fit the narrative they've been putting out for all these years. So no, whenever they form their lips to say black people commit the most crimes, I want you to bring up the NIJ research, which say they commit the most crimes. Not only here in America, their extremist group commit more crimes, even more than the Islamic groups and other terrorist groups around the world. They outpace everybody. Everybody. And see, it goes back to what I told y'all before. The red states commit the most crimes in America. They commit way more crimes than even Chicago and all of these places that they like mentioning. There are red states that have more crime going on than Chicago. So, all praises to the Most High for revealing the truth, because it's a truth that we will never get from our enemies. They're not going to rat on themselves, but they did this time. This time, because of the actions of Pam Bondi and Donald Trump, they ratted themselves out. And now everybody is getting this info. Everybody is getting this info. I mean, y'all, Donald Trump would have been better off leaving this report in place because not a lot of people knew about it until about a day ago when they took it off of the internet and it caught the attention of a lot of people. Now, everybody and their dog is going to know about this report. So I went to Chat GPT. I'm going to read this and then we're going to get into the report. I hope y'all got time because this one's going to be long. We're going to go over the whole report. I did the report in AI because it's very lengthy. It's about 13 pages long. We're going to go over the whole thing. And then we're going to go over the responses from the news and from people online that was also able to get the report after it was deleted from the government's website. Donald Trump called himself trying to hide this about his people. Okay. Donald Trump, your orange ass and old rag looking Pam Bondi, y'all try to form your lips one more time trying to talk about violent crimes and the black community and all. You just try to form your lips about it. We got this report now that says otherwise. Okay, it don't matter. We got it. It don't matter what they delete. Like I said, all I did was when I heard they deleted the report, all I needed was the name of the report. I took the name of the report and I went over to Facebook and bam, it was right there. It was right there. And I was able to download it. And you will see this report. Just go online, type in the name of the report. You'll still be able to get it because other people already had it before they deleted it. Okay. So, ChatGPT, I'm just going to read it real briefly. So, now it says in the black community it's heavier policing, so it's more people getting arrested. Well, it shouldn't be that way. It should be more white people, according to this report, getting arrested. They can't even justify anymore why they are arresting in the black community, because this is what they're saying, more than anywhere else. It's no longer justifiable when you look at this report. So it says an absolute number, white people commit more crimes. You know, that's why they love using per capita. Don't ever let them get away with using per capita. Don't ever let them get away with that. White collar and systemic crimes overwhelmingly are committed by white offenders. often outpace all street crime. So they're saying the crimes that white people commit outpace all street crime, but it don't get talked about as crime in the same way. So whites do outpace black crime. Yes, in total numbers because of population size, but rates for some street level crimes differ. But at the end of the day, they said white crime actually outpace all crime. But I thought y'all said, didn't y'all say black people commit 13% of the crime, or 13% of the population and commit 51% of the crime? Well, here's what I'm going to say: white people represent 47% of the population and commit 99% of the crime. There you go. That's my new saying. That's my new one. All right, y'all. I'm going to share my screen. First, I'm going to show you the report. I'm going to let you see a glimpse of it. And then I'm going to play the report, which I have in AI. And then I'm going to let you listen to the responses from TikTok. So this is going to be a while. Grab your favorite juice, your popcorn, anything you have at your disposal right now. All right. So here is the report, y'all. So if you type in what NIJ research tell us about domestic terrorism, you'll have the report that we're about to go over. Again, I was able to find it on Facebook when I found out they deleted this. The White House deleted this report because of what it says. All right. It says that white people are really the ones committing the biggest crimes, not only here, but even outpacing overseas. I guess if a system was set up for me to get over more than anyone else, I probably would be doing all kinds of slick stuff too. Why not? They try to get you out of everything. All right. So here's the report if you want to get it. It's a PDF, 13 pages long. All right. So now let's get to the reading of this report, y'all. Okay. Please give me a 1 if you can see my screen. Give me a 1 if you can see my screen. No, Ezra, Jacob, he did not make his money like that. You know how he's making his money? He's making his money through a lot of crypto schemes. And the bulk of his money that he's scamming is coming from his own people. That's why I ain't mad at Donald Trump. Keep right on scamming them, Donald Trump. Keep right on scamming them. That's what he's doing. He's scamming his own people out of money. And I think they said he's now up to $5 billion. And a lot of it is through crypto schemes that he is doing, and his people are just buying up all this crypto, and then Donald Trump is pulling the plug on them. So he what they're doing is buying the crypto, and then the crypto takes a nosedive, and Donald Trump keeps all the money that they paid into this crypto. And he done did it a couple of times, and you would think his people would say to themselves, I ain't buying that mess. Something ain't right. No, as soon as Donald Trump just talks about it a little bit, they go running all buck wild out there to buy it. And then a few weeks from now, the crypto will crash, and he just rakes in all the money that his people poured into his crypto. And he done did it a couple of times now. So, hey, as long as they're the ones getting scammed, I don't care. I don't care at all. All right, so let's get to this report. Listen closely because it's got a lot of important info in it.
What NIJ research tells U.S. about domestic terrorism by STVENCHRMAK, MATTHWDEMICHELE, Jeff GRUNEWALD, Michael JNSEN, Raven Lewis, and BASIA ELOPZ. NIJ-funded research projects have led to a better understanding of the processes that result in violent action, factors that increase the risk of radicalizing to violence, and how best to prevent and respond to violent extremism. Militant, nationalistic, white supremacist violent extremism has increased in the United States. In fact, the number of far-right attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violent extremism. Since 1990, far-right extremists have committed far more ideologically motivated homicides than far-left or radical Islamist extremists, including 227 events that took more than 520 lives won in this same period. Far-left extremists committed 42 ideologically motivated attacks that took 78 lives too, a recent threat assessment by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security concluded that domestic violent extremists are an acute threat and highlighted a probability that COVID-19 pandemic-related stressors, long-standing ideological grievances related to immigration, and narratives surrounding electoral fraud will continue to serve as a justification for violent actions. Over the past 20 years, the body of research that examines terrorism and domestic violent extremism has grown exponentially. Studies have looked at the similarities and differences between radicalization to violent domestic ideologies and radicalization to foreign extremist ideologies. Research has found that radicalization processes and outcomes, and perhaps potential prevention and intervention points, vary by group structure and crime type. In addition, research has explored promising and effective approaches for how communities can respond to radicalization and prevent future attacks. 2. What NIJ research tells us about domestic terrorism, National Institute of Justice NIJ, OJP. One of the more common conclusions of recent research on radicalization is that no single profile accurately captures the characteristics of the individuals who commit extremist and hate crimes. The National Institute of Justice, NIJ, has played a unique role in the evolving literature on terrorism and violent extremism. NIJ has promoted the development of comprehensive terrorism databases to help inform criminal justice responses to terrorism, address the risk of terrorism to potential targets, examine the links between terrorism and other crimes, and study the organizational, structural, and cultural dynamics of terrorism. In 2012, the U.S. Congress requested that NIJ build on these focal points by funding research targeted toward developing a better understanding of the domestic radicalization phenomenon and advancing evidence-based strategies for effective intervention and prevention. 5. NIJ has since funded more than 50 research projects on domestic radicalization, which have led to a better understanding of the processes that result in violent action, factors that increase the risk of radicalizing to violence, and how best to prevent and respond to violent extremism. This article discusses the findings of several NIJ-supported domestic radicalization studies that cover a range of individual and network-centered risk and protective factors that affect radicalization processes, including military involvement and online environments. The article also explores factors that shape the longevity of radicalization processes and their variation by group structure and crime type, and examines factors that affect pathways away from domestic extremism. It concludes with a discussion of how these findings can inform terrorism prevention strategies, criminal justice policy, and community-based prevention programming. The characteristics of U.S. extremists and individuals who commit hate crimes over the past 2 decades. Research that seeks to understand individual-level engagement in violent extremism has grown tremendously. However, as the research field has developed, a gap has emerged between the increasingly sophisticated arguments that scholars use to explain extremism and the availability of data to test, refine, and validate theories of radicalization. In 2012, NIJ funded the Empirical Assessment of Domestic Radicalization project to address the data gap in radicalization research 6. The project created the Profiles of Individual Radicalization in the United States, PIRUS, database, a cross-ideological repository of information on the characteristics of U.S. extremists. In 2017, NIJ supported a follow-on Project 7 that sought to replicate the PIRUS data for individuals in the United States who commit hate crimes. This project yielded the Bias Incidents and Actors Study (BIAS) dataset, the first data resource for researchers and practitioners interested in understanding the risk and protective factors associated with committing hate crimes. PIRUS and BIAS are designed to provide users with information on a wide range of factors that can play a role in a person's radicalization to criminal activity. These risk and protective factors can be divided into 4 domains. 9. The situational characteristics of the crimes, including whether the acts were premeditated or spontaneous, involved co-conspirators, or were committed while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. The characteristics of the victims, including whether targets were hard, for example, military bases, secure facilities, or soft, for example, businesses, public areas, private civilians, and NIJ Journal/issue number 285 June 2024 3 National Institute of Justice NIJ, OJB, Gov whether the individuals had prior relationships with their victims. Factors that produce the social bonds that may protect against mobilization to violence, such as marriage, military service, work experience, and advanced education. Factors that may act as radicalization mechanisms and risk factors for violence, such as previous criminal activity, membership in extremist or hate groups, substance use, and mental illness. The PIRUS and BIAS data have been used to generate insights on a range of important topics related to hate crime and extremism. However, there are 3 overarching findings common to both datasets: diversity in beliefs, diversity in behaviors, and diversity in characteristics. Diversity in beliefs. Although it is not uncommon for a particular ideology to dominate the public discourse around extremism, the PIRUS and BIAS data indicate that U.S. extremists and individuals who commit hate crimes routinely come from across the ideological spectrum, including far-right, far-left, Islamist, or single-issue ideologies. These ideologies break down into particular movements or sub-ideologies. For instance, in 2018, the PIRUS data identified extremists associated with several anti-government movements, Second Amendment militias, the sovereign citizen movement, white supremacy, eco-terrorism, anarchism, the anti-abortion movement, the QAnon conspiracy theory, and others. 10. The prevalence of particular movements can ebb and flow over time depending on political climate and law enforcement priorities. But at no point in recent U.S. history has one set of beliefs completely dominated extremism or hate crime activity. 11. Furthermore, the PIRUS and BIAS data reveal that U.S. extremists and individuals who commit hate crimes are often motivated by overlapping views. For instance, it is common for individuals from the anti-government militia movement to adopt views of white supremacy, or for those from the extremist environmental movement to take part in anarchist violence. Nearly 17% of the individuals in PIRUS were affiliated with more than one extremist group or sub-ideological movement, and nearly 15% of the individuals in BIAS selected the victims of their hate crimes because of multiple identity characteristics. such as race and sexual orientation, 12 diversity in behaviors. Although radicalization to violence has been a primary topic in extremism and hate crime research. The PIRUS and bias data indicate that U.S. extremists and individuals who commit hate crimes often engage in a range of violent and nonviolent criminal activities. Indeed, 42% of PIRUS and nearly 30% of bias individual actors engaged exclusively in nonviolent crimes, such as property damage, financial schemes, and illegal demonstrations. 13 Moreover, the violent outcomes represented in the PIRUS and bias data vary in scope and type. For instance, approximately 15% of those in bias committed or planned to commit mass casualty crimes, while the remaining subjects targeted specific victims. 14 Similarly, nearly 50% of those in bias did not premeditate their crimes, but rather acted spontaneously after chance encounters with their victims. 15 Diversity in characteristics. One of the more common conclusions of recent research on radicalization is that no single profile accurately captures the characteristics of the individuals who commit extremist and hate crimes. 16 The PIRUS and bias data support this finding, revealing that background characteristics vary considerably depending on ideological affiliations. For instance, white supremacists in PIRUS tend to be older and less well-educated, and are more likely to have criminal histories than those who were inspired by foreign terrorist groups, such as Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or those associated with the extremist environmental or anarchist movements. 17 Despite these differences, some risk and protective factors tend to separate violent from nonviolent individuals. Regardless of ideology. 18 In the PIRUS data, individuals with criminal records, documented or suspected mental illness, and membership in extremist cliques are more often classified as violent, while those who are married with stable employment backgrounds are more likely. For what NIJ research tells us about domestic terrorism, National Institute of Justice NIJ, OJB, Gov to engage in nonviolent crimes. 19 Similarly, in bias, violent individuals are more likely to co-offend with peers, have criminal histories that include acts of violence, and offend while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. 20 Military experience and domestic violent extremism, according to current statistics. Individuals with military backgrounds represent 11.5% of the total known extremists who have committed violent and nonviolent crimes in the United States since 1990.21. Although this percentage seems small, there has been a growing trend of former military members engaging in extremist offenses in recent years. An average of 7 people with U.S. military backgrounds per year committed extremist crimes between 1990 and 2010. That rate has risen to an average of 29 people per year over the past decade. Also worth noting is that more than half, 52%, of extremists with military experience are identified as violent. Given the growth of violent domestic extremism among military personnel, the relationship between military service and radicalization has become a major concern. Prior NIJ-funded studies have identified military experience as a potential risk factor for attempted and actual terrorism. 22. The likelihood of radicalization to violence increases when individuals have already left military service. 23. This research suggests that military service is not a social bond, it's extremist violence. NIJ studies have also shown that individuals with military experience may be susceptible to recruitment by domestic violent extremist groups due to their unique skills, which an extremist group may perceive as contributing to the success of a terrorist attack. 24 Also, transitioning from military to civilian life appears to be a pull factor for engaging in violent extremism. 25 indicators for potential involvement in extremism may include a lack of a sense of community, purpose, and belonging. If these indicators are identified early, community stakeholders, in partnership with military agencies, could have an opportunity to intervene. Although such knowledge is valuable, the role of military service in radicalization to violent extremism still requires study. Differences in violent extremist characteristics between military veterans and civilians in 2019. NIJ funded researchers at the University of Southern California to investigate the link between military service and violent domestic extremism. They are also examining the differences between military veteran and civilian extremists in terms of their characteristics and social networks. 26. Although this study is ongoing, preliminary findings have been drawn from a secondary analysis of the American terrorism study data, which contain information on people federally indicted for terrorism-related crimes by the U.S. government between 1980 and 2002.27. With these data, the researchers compared the demographic and homegrown violent extremist characteristics among military veterans and civilians. The demographic characteristics considered were age, race, sex, marital status, and education level. The homegrown violent extremist characteristics consisted of the length of group membership, type of terrorist group, role in the group, mode of recruitment into the group, primary target, and the state of indictment. The research team observed significant differences between military veteran and civilian extremists across both demographic and homegrown violent extremist characteristics. First, they found that military veteran and civilian extremists differed with respect to age, sex, and marital status. Specifically, individuals with military service who engaged in homegrown violent extremism were more likely to be older, male, and in marital or cohabiting relationships than civilians who engaged in homegrown violent extremism. Second, analyses revealed that, compared to civilian extremists, military veteran extremists had greater affiliations with right-wing terrorist groups versus left-wing, international, or other terrorist groups, and were more likely to hold leadership positions within these groups and either initiate a terrorist group or unite groups together. Finally, other than government federal officials or buildings, which were the primary targets across all groups, the primary targets of veterans were diverse social groups, such NIJ Journal/issue number 285 June 2024 5 National Institute of Justice NIJ OJB Gov as those belonging to racial, ethnic, and religious minority groups. Implications of transitioning out of military service. The University of Southern California researchers intend to supplement these results by interviewing members from the social networks of military veterans and civilians who committed homegrown violent extremism between 2003 and 2019. The findings produced thus far are important, especially because the association between military experience and terrorism is understudied. Ultimately, these results suggest that people who transition from active duty to veteran status experience a nuanced, complex, and potentially lifelong process. Veterans who encounter difficulties during this transition and desire, but lack a sense of community, purpose, and belonging after leaving the military may be attracted to the pull of domestic extremist groups. In these groups, veterans can lead and collaborate with others of similar ideologies to accomplish a shared mission akin to what they did in the military. For example, the military veterans in this study largely endorsed right-wing values. Thus, perhaps something about the narratives of right-wing extremist groups compensates for the void felt when leaving military service. With such insights in mind, researchers recommend forming partnerships among civilians, the military, and veteran communities to identify and prevent violent extremism among U.S. veterans. Longevity of terrorist plots in the United States. A major question for researchers and counterterrorism officials is how to prevent the next act of terrorism or violent extremism from occurring. As such, much attention has been paid to disrupted plots and successful interdiction tactics that ultimately led to arrest and indictment. Less attention has been given to what those responsible for acts of terrorism and violent extremism do to successfully evade detection and arrest. In other words, the focus has not been on what terrorists and violent extremists are doing right. 2013, NIJ funded researchers at the University of Arkansas Terrorism Research Center to study the sequencing of precursor behaviors for individuals who have been federally indicted in the United States for charges related to terrorism and domestic violent extremism. 28, based on preliminary analyses. The researchers somewhat serendipitously observed lifespan differences between lone actors and those operating in small cells or more formalized groups. Consequently, it warranted a more comprehensive examination of the factors that increase the likelihood of terrorists and violent extremists evading arrest. NIJ funded the researchers to identify behaviors that improve the chances of plot longevity, or the ability for terrorists to commit acts of terrorism and evade capture by law enforcement. For individuals federally indicted on terrorism-related charges, 29 data on the longevity of terrorism and violent extremism plots come from the American Terrorism Study, the longest-running project on terrorism and violent extremism in the United States. With NIJ funding that began in 200,330, the American Terrorism Study maintains the most comprehensive dataset on temporally linked precursor behaviors and outcomes of terrorism and violent extremism plots. To examine plot longevity, the Arkansas researchers 31 limited their analyses to 346 federally indicted individuals who were linked to the planning or completion of a terrorist attack in the United States from 1980 to 2015. Longevity, or duration of their terrorist lifespan, is based on the date of a person's involvement in their first preparatory activity and their neutralizing date, usually the date of arrest. One of the key findings from this research is a correlation between significant declines in the lifespan of individual terrorists and major changes to the U.S. Attorney General guidelines established to combat terrorism and violent extremism in the United States. For example, those who began in the mid to late 1970s, following Watergate, COINTELPRO, and the Privacy Act, had a median longevity of 2,230 days. In contrast, the median lifespan of terrorists who began operating in the mid-1980s decreased to 1,067. 6. What NIJ research tells us about domestic terrorism. National Institute of Justice NIJ, OJP, Gov days. Later, in the early 2000s, it fell even further to 99 days, which reflects the FBI's tighter focus on terrorism and violent extremism and guidelines granting law enforcement more discretion in the investigative techniques employed. The researchers also found that the lifespans of terrorists and violent extremists vary significantly depending on key attributes, such as ideology, sex, and educational attainment. For example, environmental and extreme left-wing violent extremists tend to sustain themselves for relatively long periods of time, 5.4 and 4.3 years, respectively, while the longevity of extreme right-wing and radical Islamist terrorists is, on average, 2 years or less. Females federally indicted on charges related to terrorism and violent extremism also tend to have increased longevity compared to male terrorists and violent extremists, perhaps because of females' disproportionate representation in longer-lasting extreme left-wing and environmental movements, as well as increased representation in left-wing group leadership roles. Females involved in terrorism and extremism are usually more educated, which is also associated with extended longevity. Further, females who play support roles in terrorism and extremist groups, as is more often the case for right-wing extremists and radical Islamist terrorists, also appear to have longer lifespans. In contrast, males have been more likely to engage in overtly criminal preparatory behavior and actual incident participation than females. Both types of behavior are significantly more likely to attract the attention of law enforcement, expected to shorten the longevity of both male and female terrorists and violent extremists. Finally, longevity also depends on a plot's sophistication and the extent of the planning required to carry it out. Less sophisticated plans or executed plots, or those using simpler and less advanced weapons, are generally associated with longer lifespans for terrorists and violent extremists. More sophisticated plots may provide greater potential for missteps by terrorists and violent extremists and leads for law enforcement. Additionally, more sophisticated plots are associated with more meetings with accomplices and necessitate extra preparation. Importantly, both the number of meetings and preparatory activities have been found to be negatively related to the successful completion of terrorist incidents, suggesting that early intervention or arrest are also linked to these two factors. How domestic terrorists use the internet. Terrorists and terrorist groups use the internet to share propaganda and recruit new members. The internet provides a platform to strengthen their members' commitment to the cause, encourage radicalized individuals to act, and coordinate legal and illegal activities. A recently published meta-analysis concluded exposure to radical content online appears to have a larger relationship with radicalization than other media-related risk factors. For example, television usage, media exposure, and the impact of this relationship is most pronounced for the behavioral outcomes of radicalization. 32. In 2014, NIJ funded a study to develop a deeper understanding of what domestic terrorists discuss on the Internet. 33. The study analyzed 18,120 posts from 7 online web forums by and for individuals interested in the ideological far right. The research team read each post's content and coded it for either quantitative or qualitative analyses depending on the project's objective. The project provided several important insights into terrorist use of the internet. First, the web forums included discussions about a variety of beliefs, such as gun rights, conspiracy theories, hate-based sentiments, and anti-government beliefs. However, the intensity of ideological expression was generally weak. The nature of the online environments that far-right groups use likely facilitates the diffusion of ideological agendas. Second, the amount and type of involvement in these forums played a key role in radicalization. Posting behaviors changed over time. Users grew more ideological and radical as other users reinforced their ideas and connected their ideas to those from NIJ Journal/issue number 285 June 2024, 7 National Institute of Justice NIJ, OJB, Gov other forums. It is important to note that the study focused on online expression and not conversion to offline violence. Third, far-right extremists were primarily interested in general technology issues. Discussions focused on encryption tools and methods, such as Tor, internet service providers and social media platforms, and law enforcement actions to surveil illicit activities online. These far-right extremists appeared more interested in defensive actions than sophisticated schemes for radicalization or offensive actions, such as criminal cyberattacks. The study used social network analyses to visualize user communications and network connections, focusing on individuals' responses to posts made within threads to highlight interconnected associations between actors. The social network analyses indicated that far-right forums have a low network density, which suggests a degree of information recycling between key actors. The redundant connections between actors may slow the spread of new information. As a result, such forums may inefficiently distribute new knowledge due to their relatively insular nature. They may also be generally difficult to disrupt, as the participants' language and behaviors reinforce others and create an echo chamber. These networks are similar to others observed in computer hacker communities and data theft forums 34, which suggests that there may be consistencies in the nature of online dialogue, regardless of the content. The study also indicated that extreme external events usually did not affect posting behaviors. However, there were significant differences associated with conspiratorial, anti-Islamic, and anti-immigrant posts after the Boston Marathon bombing. It may be that violence or major disruptive events inspired by jihadist ideologies draw great responses from far-right groups relative to their own actions. The same appears to be true for the 2012 presidential election. The study observed increases both in the number of posts in the month after the election and in overt signs of individual ties or associations to far-right movements through self-claim posts, movement-related signatures, and usernames. These findings are consistent with other recent work comparing online mobilization after the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, 35 entering and exiting white supremacy in the United States. An NIJ-funded research team led by RTI International examined the complex social psychological processes involved with entering, mobilizing, and exiting white supremacy in the United States. 36. The researchers conducted in-depth life history interviews with 47 former members of white supremacist groups in 24 states and 2 provinces in Canada. 37. For this project, white supremacy referred to groups that reject essential democratic ideals, equality, and tolerance. A key organizing principle is that inherent differences between races and ethnicities position white and European ancestry above all others. Those interviewed were authoritarian, anti-liberal, or militant nationalists who had a general intolerance toward people of color. They had used violence to achieve their goals and supported a race war to eradicate the world of non-white people. 38. The study led to several key findings about entering and exiting white supremacy in the United States. Hate as outcome, the study found that most people do not join white supremacist groups because they are adherents of a particular ideology. Rather, a combination of background factors increases the likelihood that someone will be susceptible to recruitment messaging. For example, propaganda. 39. Previous research has highlighted that hate or adherence to racist violence was an outcome of participation in white supremacist groups. 40. The commitment to white supremacist groups lacked a pre-existing sense of racial grievance or hatred that motivated an individual to join the racist movement. 41. One former member reported having no inkling of what nazism really was other than what you saw on TV. 42. The NIJ-funded study found that people joined white supremacist groups because they were angry, lonely, and isolated, and they were looking for opportunities to express their rage. 43. 8. What NIJ research tells us about domestic terrorism, National Institute of Justice NIJ, OJP, GOV vulnerabilities as precondition. The former white supremacists had various personal, psychological, and social vulnerabilities that made them strive for what psychologists have framed as developing a new possible self. 44. High levels of negative life experiences, including, but not limited to, maladjustment, abuse, and family instability, potentially make a person imagine a new, different, and more fulfilled self. 45. They can imagine an empowered future self with friends and a purpose. Extremist recruiters prey on these desires. The former white supremacists indicated high levels of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse as children, strained personal relationships, and general difficulties throughout their lives. These struggles made white supremacy seem like an improvement to their sense of self, as the group came with a ready-made set of friends, social events, and camaraderie among individuals with similarly rough pasts. Besides these social benefits, white supremacist groups provided members with a deeper sense of belonging and explanation for their life troubles, rooted in a sense of racial pride and empowerment. Gradual, nonlinear exit. Most white supremacists in this country do not remain members for life. Rather, Group membership is often temporary, but not always short-lived, and many become disillusioned and burnt out over time. The study showed that the exit process is gradual, as the former white supremacists reported slowly becoming dissatisfied with the ideology, tactics, or politics of a Group 46. They described an identity that became filled with negative encounters with other members, even breeding distrust. White supremacy requires the development of a totalizing identity that results in isolating members from non-extremists. This marginalization fosters a sense of social stigma that makes white supremacy less attractive and further supports disengagement and de-radicalization processes. This research reported that emotional dynamics create trajectories of development and decline in white supremacy, and the role of disillusionment among the reasons why members exit the organization. 47. These analyses offer an explanation for how white supremacist organizations maintain solidarity, even though many individuals stay in groups after losing their ideological commitment. They also demonstrate that exit from a group is a nonlinear process. 48. Meanwhile, in Av.
No, I'm here. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Give me a 1 if you can hear me. Give me a 1 if you can hear what I'm saying. Okay. All right. No, what I was saying was the fact that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi was trying to remove this report, that right there just proves they know who's committing all of the crimes up in here. They know who the extremists are up in here. They feel so guilty that they had to take this report down because they don't want the world to see who the real criminals are, not only in America, but worldwide. They don't want anybody to know just how bad it is in their community. And the reason why it's so bad is because you have designed the laws and set everything up for a particular people to get away with everything. They're blameless even when they should be blamed. They don't go to jail when they should go to jail. And it just goes to show you, y'all, they've been scapegoating off of our people all this time about crime. Oh, black people commit all the crimes. No, we don't. Y'all do. Y'all do. And your president and your attorney general know this. That's why they ran out on the internet and tried to take this down and keep it out of the hands of the public. They know who's committing all the crimes up in here. I promise you, if it was us, they would have kept this thing up all day and all night and would have been harping on it. Oh, we got to get these people under control. Oh, the thugs. No, your people are the thugs. That's what this report is saying. Y'all are the thugs. And you've been deflecting all this time. There is no justifiable reason. After reading through this report, there is no justifiable reason why most of your inmates are Black men. There is no justifiable reason when your inmates should be white males. But they get to be criminals and remain outside of the system. And, every time they speak of crime in our community, they always leave out all of the exonerations. They always leave that part out. Our men are the most exonerated out of every group in this country. They never include that in their crime statistics. And the reason why it looks so big is because they go on the arrest. A lot of people are arrested in our community due to over policing, but many that are arrested are not charged, or they'll throw you in jail for the next 2, 3 years without ever charging you. That's how they have been doing the people in our community. You could be in jail for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years and never have any charges on you. But their men really are committing the crimes and they remain free. Go figure. So, y'all, we're going to listen to some of the reaction, not only from the news, but from people that I was able to get off of TikTok. All right, hold on 1 second. Let me pull this up. And yes, I hope everybody is buzzing about this. I know they're not going to like it, but I don't care what they don't like. Please give me a 1 if you can see my screen. Give me a 1 if you can see my screen. Oh, yeah, it's a big cover up, y'all, from the top down to the bottom when it comes down to crime. It is the biggest cover up probably in the history of this country of who's committing the crime and how this government all this time has been hiding the face of the criminal in this country and pushing us out there as those faces and been lying the entire time. Thank you.
Right now, the Department of Justice has deleted a study from its website that showed that right-wing violence and white supremacy outpaced all other forms of violence in America. According to 404 Media, which is an independent news organization, they found out that the Department of Justice deleted the study, which was conducted recently, and is currently reviewing materials about this study and other similar studies on its website. But the study essentially said that right-wing violence is outpacing all other types of violence. White supremacy violence is outpacing all other types of violence. And it was a pretty important study to show that domestic terrorism and homegrown terrorism really is contributing to a lot of the violence in the United States of America. And now this Department of Justice, unsurprisingly, is actually trying to whitewash these studies from the public's purview. As always, spread the word. I'll do a full breakdown of this and more on my Substack, linked in bio, so subscribe for free and follow along, stay up to date on all the news you need to know about. I will have much more to come soon.
MAGA Attorney General Pam Bondi was just exposed in a huge scandal. Her Justice Department was just caught secretly deleting pages of studies that prove that right-wing violence is a much bigger threat than left-wing extremism. But here's the truth that I'm going to give. Deleting a study doesn't change the reality. Right-wing violence is the #1 threat, whether you like it or not. And I know it makes you feel uncomfortable, MAGA, conservatives, or whoever it is on the right. I know it makes you feel uncomfortable. You can erase the data, you can erase the studies, but you can't erase the bodies that prove it. Instead of protecting the American people, Pam Bondi decides to protect her politics. Her Justice Department decides to protect conservatism and MAGA over the American people. And it is ignorant. And American people be so dumb that nobody will research this. Left-wing violence is just a scapegoat. And yes, it happens sometimes, but it is rare compared to right-wing violence. And you can pause and read this. The numbers never back up their claims. And when facts don't fit MAGA's narrative, they just erase them. That's why the majority of their base stays ignorant. They don't read, they just drink the Kool-Aid. Pam Bondi chose party over public safety. And that's betrayal to the American people. And if you agree with this video, be sure to hit that follow button.
Well, and I know how much longer it's going to be possible for me to be physically shocked about anything. I don't know how much longer. So our current administration's Department of Justice just deleted the database that tracks police misconduct. What I find interesting is that this database was actually a suggestion of President Trump after the George Floyd murders. And then it was signed into law under Biden. And now Trump has been like, delete it. We don't need it anymore. It's no problem. Get rid of it. On top of that, in Arizona, I believe it is, Bill 1111 has just been introduced to establish a bounty fund created by the fees from wire transfers that would pay the police officers who hunt down and find immigrants. If they are successfully deported, they would get $2,500. So bounty hunters sounds a lot like slave catchers to me. On top of the fact that who knows if they're actually going to be successfully deported or actually just put in our for-profit prison systems, which we know the oligarchs will make money off of. We should absolutely not be paying to hunt humans. It's a very dangerous game. And also not a coincidence. Both of those things are absolutely related. And it's not like this isn't a problem. The great majority of officers at every level, whether that be federal, state, your local police officers, are great humans doing a really difficult job and doing their best. I personally have had excellent interactions with the police in my city, and I'm extremely proud of them. But that doesn't change the fact that there are bad apples in every single fucking bunch. There absolutely is. And the fact that now we're going to just embolden the ones who are bad to chase down and harm people. And now that we're not tracking their behaviors, it's going to be so much harder to get rid of them or to persecute them. On top of the fact that those officers who do bad things make the life and the job for the good officers so much more difficult. It actually endangers them. It makes it so that people have less trust in the police. This is an incredibly bad idea. Both of these are incredibly bad ideas. We should not be hunting down humans like animals for money. It's not like we have a problem with deportations right now. Deportation numbers have been extremely high for several years, even under the Biden administration. This is a witch hunt when the witch doesn't even exist. Like this, why? Why are we so focused on this? How exactly does this help? I keep saying the things that you promised to do to make life easier for people, and make things cheaper, to make things more affordable, are not the things that are being focused on in any way, shape, or form. The idea that there could be any positive benefit to deleting a database that tracks misconduct is absolutely ludicrous. We are falling further and further into chaos. And I'm shocked every day how many people just think that I'm crazy and fear-mongering. It's not like the information isn't out there. The information out there, you can go and look for yourself. This is a terrible move that is going to harm a great deal of people. And once all of these things have to be reinstated, it's like a huge waste of time that is making a whole lot of work for the people of the future to just fix all of the things that are being broken. There is no good reason to delete that database, and there is no good reason to financially incentivize people to hunt other humans, because we know that they're going to hunt just based on either language or skin color alone.
Extremist murders and who commits them. Is it the left? Is it the Democrats? Is it the liberals? No, it is not. The ADL concludes from 2024, all of the extremist-related murders in that year were committed by right-wing extremists of various kinds, with 8 of the 13 killings involving white supremacists and the remaining 5 having connections to far-right anti-government groups. This is the 3rd year in a row that right-wing extremists have been connected to all identified extremist-related killings.
Hey, so just a quick update on my previous post where I said that that study that I was looking for had been wiped off the internet. I found it. So this is it right here. This is actually from June of 2024, and it's got all the stuff in there that I was saying. I had to find this through the Wayback Machine, through the web archive, after finding it in the footnote of a different study on domestic terror, and then using that URL in the footnote to go into the Wayback Machine. Now, this is the thing that I've talked a lot about on the podcast, on the Substack, and on this app here, about how the government is losing good data by its own accord. It's just erasing it. And that's a problem for all of us because the government has to use its own data for these things, but also universities, police departments, hospitals, health companies all over the country, food producers need this critical government data, and they're not going to be able to get it from an official source, and they're probably not going to spend the time to do what I did, which is scour scholarly articles for a URL to put it into the Wayback Machine. So losing vital data is a problem.
So apparently the DOJ, according to 404 Media, has deleted a study that shows that right-wing extremism and YT supremacy are outpacing any other domestic threats within the country. Why would they do such a thing? Could it be that they've diverted the FBI into helping with ICE's directives? Could it be that so many of these groups openly support this regime? So many options as to why.
President Donald Trump is saying that he wants to label Antifa a terrorist organization. But here's the problem. The Department of Homeland Security's own numbers contradict that narrative. In its 2020 Homeland Threat Assessment, DHS wrote that white supremacist extremists will remain the most persistent and lethal threat to the homeland. They state clearly that far-right extremists have committed way more deadly attacks than any other movement in the country. Fast forward to 2025, DHS reports, and the language has changed. Instead of clearly identifying far-right extremists as the top domestic terror threat, they broadly group multiple ideologies together, including anti-government, racial, even far left. It creates a confusion and downplays the consistent data. The numbers don't lie, guys. Far-right violence has killed far more Americans than far-right groups, including anyone calling themselves Antifa. So when Trump pushes to label Antifa as a terrorist group, he's ignoring his own government's evidence. The data points to the right, the far right, but the politics point somewhere else. The full story, news clips, and all the details will be on my YouTube channel tonight, so go check it out. Subscribe and turn on notifications. My name is Jared Zisser. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Substack, and YouTube for breaking news, updates, and the full story.
You won't believe what the Trump administration has just done. On the day after Charlie Kirk's life was taken, the Trump administration removed a study about extremism by the far right that was placed on the DOJ website and conducted by the National Institute of Justice. The study, which you see behind me, taken by the Wayback Machine on the day after Charlie Kirk's life was taken, showed that homegrown violent extremism by the far right was more of a problem than the far left. This is fascism. There's no other way to describe it.
No surprise here, but the Department of Justice just deleted a report on the national website because it contradicted the narrative of political violence. You can pause to read, but it looks like 404 Media was the one who initially posted about the story. And in summer, it apparently showed that they deleted a study quietly that showed proof that right wing violence continued to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violent extremism in the United States. The study was available online at least until Friday of last week. It is now Tuesday, so that would be Friday the 12th, I believe, according to 404 Media, but can now be found only via a Wayback Machine link. So here is the study, at least part of it. It's hard to swipe through on mobile, but I'm going to look at the full study when I get back to my desk. But this is the study, and it shows there militant, nationalistic, white supremacist, violent extremism has increased in the United States. In fact, the number of far-right attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violent extremism. Since 1990, far-right extremists have committed far more ideologically motivated homicides than far-left or radical Islamist extremists, including 227 events that took more than 520 lives. In the same period, far-left extremists committed 42 motivated attacks that took 78 lives. I want to remind you that this is not normal, that for a government to proactively delete any data and studies that deflate any narrative or rhetoric just because it does not confirm their biases is wrong. It is troublesome, and it is not how democracy is meant to be shaped. I will have the link available on my link tree if you're interested in this study. It is important to always look at facts over feelings. Media is designed to enrage you. And unfortunately, there is a young, lonely male epidemic in this country, and mental health is not being made available. So they find solace in these far right discussion groups. And then they form these ideologies that basically blame everything else for why they're lonely, why they cannot socialize, why they are broke, why they may be jobless. Instead of looking inward, they are blaming everything else. And this is what happens. You can follow for more updates, but you don't have to.
Trump administration removed the reporting from the DOJ website. Watch this.
Is that you guys are saying that it mostly happens on the left. No statistic, no government statistic, no study group, the Cato Institute, the Anti-Defamation League, the FBI, no government statistic shows what you're saying. It's showing the exact opposite, that 60 to 75% of the political violence is committed by people on the right. But yet you, the president, the vice president, the attorney general of the United States are giving false information to the American people that it only happens on the left and that it is
false information about Republicans. You guys have called
If there's no facts, so what you're saying.
Kamala Harris called us fascists while she was running for president.
The president called her fascist as well.
Well, the Justice Department has removed a study from its website which found that the number of far-right attacks continue to outpace all other types of terrorism. So then I did some digging. DHS.gov, categories, evidence-based research, Department of Justice. The National Institute of Justice funded research projects have led to a better understanding of the processes that result in violent action factors. So when you click on it, guess what? Gone. And what did that report state? Militant, nationalistic, white supremacist violent extremism has increased in the United States, the report stated. In fact, the number of far-right attacks continue to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violent extremism. Since 1990, far-right extremists have committed far more ideologically motivated homicides than far-left or radical Islamist extremists, including 227 events that 520 lives. In that same period, far-left extremists committed 42 ideologically motivated attacks that took 78 lives, the report continued. I'm going to tell you, I don't like violence. I don't agree with it. It's all really scary. But you got to call a spade, and you got to take accountability. And saying the Democrats, the lunatic Democrats, the far left, it's all propaganda. Or the immigrants, they're bad hombres. That they don't like the data. They had to remove it. They don't want that up there. It doesn't fit their narrative.
The Department of Justice scrubbed a report showing white supremacist violence outpaces every other domestic extremist threat. Well, they took it down. Let me tell you why that matters. This wasn't a conspiracy. It was a Department of Justice report publicly posted with hard numbers. Far-right white supremacist attacks have caused more ideologically motivated homicides than far-left or Islamist extremists since 1990. That study sat on a government site and then it vanished this week. Why it matters? When the government erases evidence, it doesn't erase the problem. It erases accountability. If the agencies tasked with tracking threats bury the data, how do policymakers, reporters, and communities respond? Who gets prioritized for prevention and funding? Think about who benefits from downplaying the threat. The politics of fear is selective. White supremacist violence laid bare makes certain narratives, and certain powerful people can look bad. So instead of confronting it, the page disappears. That's very, very convenient, don't you think? This is public business. Demand transparency. Ask your representatives. Tag Department of Justice. Share the archived copies. Don't let them quiet the data while the violence keeps happening. We need resources for prevention, not cover-ups. And if you want the original report and the archives, I'll try to pull them up and I'll link them here. Share this and, wake up, people.
They know that this guy is a far right extremist of the extremists. They know who it is. They knew before we knew. They knew before I went down that rabbit hole for sure. But one thing that we do know for 100% certainty is they are hypocrites, number one. Number two, they're always going to project what they're doing unto the opposition. And when they can't do that, they deflect with the what is, what if, what about isms. All the time. It's the same thing. It's the same playbook all the fucking time. So, but don't sit here and act like you think that they don't already know. They're not stupid people. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're not like, you got some systematically planner people that do this dumb shit, but then you got this shit here. They know. They just want to see if they can spin and spin and spin. So if they say that if they can say it enough times, if they keep saying it, 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 it's going to become the truth. And that's what they've been living off of. And for some people that works. But when you know, they know this motherfucker is a groper. They know his background. They know everything about it. And they're tying themselves up in knots trying to spin this shit into something else. So you can keep saying it's a liberal lunatic, but we know good and fucking well who it is. And we have already explored the history of the relationship between Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes, which I did not know until yesterday. But they know. But they think if they say it enough and they move fast and fuck shit up, then they just gonna keep doing it and we just gonna look away from it. We're not looking away. And where the goddamn Epstein files at while we're talking about it. But this shit here, this is on the horizon. Like, if this whole thing was to distract you from the Epstein files, bravo, you got me this time. Yeah, you sure did. You got me this time. You sure did, but I'm back on them. But I ain't worrying about none of this. I don't care. I don't care about none of this. Y'all get your fucking kids because somebody's not watching their kids. Like, miss me. I'm so sick of people coming in my comments talking about, ask me if I know Jesus and don't do that. I know him. I know him. I know the original one. I don't know this motherfucker that y'all be dealing with. I know Jesus, but I don't know him. I don't know that one that y'all dealing with. But stop playing with us. Stop playing. We know. I'm just gonna watch and see how it come out. But where are the fucking Epstein files? We haven't forgotten this shit. We don't care. It's one movie thing, and he cares so much about Charlie Kirk that he gonna go play golf instead of going to his whatever you call it, his little memorial. Is that all right with y'all? He loved him so much that when he had the opportunity to say some words about him, he deflected and started talking about that fucking raggedy ass
trifling ass ballroom that don't nobody want but him. I'm gonna leave it right there.
How would you analyze what you're hearing in response to this murder from the left?
From the left? I mean, just listening to the clips you played from the Trump administration, we're in a very dark moment. It's a very McCarthyite moment right now. I've been listening to your show. You made a lot of good points. The biggest point I think you've glossed over is the crackdown on free speech, this targeting of people for their views. I thought Charlie Kirk was supposed to be a free speech martyr. Why are the right using his death to crack down on free speech and American rights and go after this amorphous left? J.D. Vance lied today on the Charlie Kirk show when he said the statistics are clear that this is a left-wing problem. It's the exact reverse. Right, exact reverse. You look at the ADL Center for Extremism, which looked at 444 people killed by extremists between 2013 and 2022, 75% of them by the right. You look at the University of Maryland study that was done for their Terrorism Center, which found that from 1948 to 2018, right-wing extremists more likely to carry out violence than left-wing extremists. You look at the head of the FBI, who Donald Trump appointed, Chris Wray, who said the #1 domestic terror threat in this country comes from religious and racially motivated extremists, specifically white supremacists. You can keep going. The National Institute for Justice found that the majority of incidents since 1990, violent terroristic acts were right-wing extremists. The single biggest day of political violence, Chris, in our lifetimes in this country was January 6th, 2021, when right-wing extremists attacked the Capitol, injured police officers. They were ideologically motivated. You and I agreed it was an insurrection at the time. So it's bizarre for Vance to go on TV or go online and say the exact opposite of what both the official statistics say and the think tanks say. All of our evidence tells us. I mean, there was a Democratic lawmaker, Chris, I don't know how many times we have to say this, who was murdered in our home with her husband in June by a Trump supporter. And Donald Trump today said, who? When he was asked about it, he said, who?
Mm-hmm. So, Mehdi, one quick thing. I do not think January 6th was an insurrection. I thought that it was all kinds
of crimes. You said it at the time, Chris. I just you called it an insurrection at the time. You did. You did.
I never thought. Okay, go ahead. Show it to me.
Check it out.
I never thought that they were trying to take over the government. That's what an insurrection is. But it doesn't matter. It was bad. But we're dealing with new bad stuff. That is
political violence. We can agree, right, Chris? It was political violence.
100%.
Of course, we have to make sure that the killer is brought to justice. And importantly, we have to talk about this incredibly destructive movement of left-wing extremism that has grown up over the last few years. And I believe is part of the reason why Charlie was killed by an assassin's bullet. We're going to talk about how to dismantle that. And while our side of the certainly has its crazies, it is a statistical fact that most of the lunatics in American politics today are proud members of the far left.
A bullshit? A bullshit? A bullshit.
That little toddler is funny. A bullshit? A bullshit? Yeah, that was J.D. Vance. He is now sitting in on Charlie Kirk's podcast, and he said that on the podcast, I think like 2 days ago. And he really shouldn't be doing that as a VP. You know, we already know the man is a white supremacist, and now he's on a podcast. I don't think VPs should be on podcasts like that. He should be doing his job as vice president. A podcast, you can do all of that when you're out of office. And at this rate, I think if they ran J.D. Vance as president, he would never win. Donald Trump would never win at this point. A lot of people are mad at Donald Trump, especially his own people. They are pissed at all the stuff he's done. And he wouldn't even win. I think the next election cycle, if we have to live through that nightmare again, more than likely a Democrat is going to win. It's definitely not going to be J.D. Vance. It's definitely not going to be Donald Trump. The damage is done. And the fact that Donald Trump is now talking about sending the National Guard to Memphis, and we know the red states got the biggest crimes. I don't know why he's not going in these rural areas where MAGA is and sending the National Guard in there. That's where they need to go. They need to go in these red states and go around these rural areas because that's where all the crime is. And stop trying to perpetrate a fraud by implicating cities that have our people in big numbers. That's what he's trying to do. They're trying to keep up the illusion that it's us, and it's not us. It's never been us, and it never will be us. But see, he's not going to ever check his own people. Okay, he's never going to check his own people, y'all. And how are things going to get better if you don't acknowledge where the problem is? And you can see these folks refuse to acknowledge where the real problem is. As long as they're reflecting, then the problem persists. Plain and simple. As long as they're lying about where the trouble is coming from, then the problem will always persist. So it just goes to show you they're not interested in fixing anything. They're just interested in making sure they don't look like the guilty party, even when they are the guilty party. That's all we are seeing up in here. So, y'all, didn't mean to keep you long. So, wow, an hour and almost 26 minutes, but it was well worth it if I can present this to you. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I deeply appreciate your time. And more than likely, I would not be surprised if this gets demonetized, y'all. I would not be shocked if it does. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if everybody that is putting up this report and showing it and reading it and presenting it will get demonetized, because they, anytime you tell too much truth, they don't want you to get paid for that. That's how it is. So, y'all, enjoy the rest of your day. Be on the lookout for my other upcoming live streams and premieres. Shalom, family.